On a drought-stricken farm in the heartland, Thomas Reeves was losing everything he had ever worked for. His crops were failing, and the bank was just days away from foreclosing on his family's century-old farm. That stormy evening, when he found a stranger's car stuck in the muddy back road, Thomas faced a choice: tend to his dying crops before the storm hit or help someone in need. In those few hours of assisting the lost traveler, he missed his chance to protect his harvest from the devastating storm. As he watched his crops drowning in the flood that night, shoulders heavy with despair, he had no idea that somewhere in the darkness, the person he helped was making a phone call that would transform his world forever. 2 weeks later, the quiet morning sky filled with the thundering sound of an approaching helicopter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Reeves lived on the outskirts of Millbrook Valley, working the same soil his grandfather had first tilled nearly 100 years ago. The small farmhouse needed repairs, its white paint peeling under the relentless sun, but inside, the walls held something more precious than perfection: photographs spanning 3 generations of farmers who had called this land home. Every morning, Thomas woke before dawn, his calloused hands gripping a coffee mug as he stared out at fields that were slowly turning brown under the worst drought in 50 years. His daughter Emily would join him, her textbook spread across the worn kitchen table as she studied before helping with the morning chores. They had a routine, father and daughter, moving through their tasks in comfortable silence, each carrying the weight of dreams they feared might never come true. The farm had been struggling since Catherine's illness took both her life and their savings 5 years ago. Medical bills had forced Thomas to take out loans he could barely afford, and now the bank's patience was wearing thin. William Parker, the local bank manager, had made it clear. They had until the end of the month to make the payment, or they'd lose everything. Emily's college acceptance letter lay hidden in Thomas's drawer, unopened. She'd worked so hard for that scholarship, but even with financial aid, they couldn't afford the remaining costs. Some nights, he'd catch her looking at the letter's envelope, her fingers tracing the university's emblem, but neither of them spoke about it. The drought had withered more than just their crops. It had started to dry up their hopes too. That Thursday evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the first real rain in months. Thomas worked frantically in the fields, preparing what was left of his crops for the coming storm. The Weather Service had warned of possible flooding. Too much rain too fast could be just as devastating as no rain at all. He needed to reinforce the drainage system and secure the young cornstalks that still had a chance of surviving. Emily was at their elderly neighbor Maria's house, helping with her weekly grocery delivery. "Dad, I can come back and help," she'd offered. But Thomas had insisted she keep her promise to Maria. That's who they were, people who kept their promises, even when it cost them something. The first drops of rain began to fall as Thomas loaded sandbags onto his old pickup truck. The storm was coming faster than expected, and he still had the entire north field to protect. That's when he heard it. The distinct sound of a car engine revving helplessly, accompanied by the spray of mud. Following the sound, Thomas drove down the muddy back road that marked the edge of his property. Through the increasing rain, he spotted a sleek city car stuck in one of the deep ruts that made these roads treacherous for anyone unfamiliar with them. A woman in business attire stood beside the vehicle, her expensive suit soaked, trying desperately to push the car free. Thomas checked his watch. The storm was nearly upon them. Every minute spent away from his fields meant more crops at risk, more of his family's future in danger. Parker's words echoed in his mind. "One more missed payment, Reeves, and it's over." The woman waved frantically as his headlights illuminated her predicament. He thought of Catherine then, of all the times she'd told Emily that character was built in moments when doing the right thing was the hardest thing. The rain fell harder as Thomas put his truck in park. Some choices defined a person, and he knew he couldn't leave someone stranded in a storm even if it cost him everything. "Ma'am," he called out, grabbing his rain jacket, "let me help you with that." As he stepped into the rain, thunder rolled across the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance his unprotected crops waited for a storm that would show no mercy. The woman introduced herself as Dr. Alexandra Patel, a researcher who'd gotten lost while surveying the area. Her GPS had led her down the wrong road, and now she was stuck miles from the nearest town. Thomas didn't ask more questions. There wasn't time. Together, they worked in the strengthening storm, using boards from his truck to give the car's wheels traction. An hour passed before they finally freed her vehicle. By then, the storm was raging in full force. Thomas's clothes were soaked through, and his fields. He tried not to think about his exposed crops. Dr. Patel grabbed his arm before he could leave, having to shout over the wind. "I don't know how to thank you. Please let me compensate you for your time." Thomas just shook his head, rain streaming down his face. "Get yourself to town safely, ma'am. That's enough. Thanks." He watched until her taillights disappeared into the storm before racing back to his fields. But he already knew. It was too late. That night, the storm unleashed its fury on Millbrook Valley. Thomas worked in the darkness, the beam of his flashlight cutting through sheets of rain as he desperately tried to salvage what he could. The floodwaters rose faster than anyone had predicted, turning his fields into shallow lakes. Each crack of lightning illuminated the devastation, showing him exactly what those hours of helping Dr. Patel had cost him. Emily found him at dawn, still standing in the muddy field. She'd rushed home from Maria's as soon as the storm had let up enough to drive. The morning light revealed what the darkness had hidden. Nearly half their remaining crops lay flattened beneath the muddy water. The drainage system he hadn't had time to reinforce had failed, turning portions of their land into swampland. "Dad?" Emily's voice cracked as she approached, her boots sinking into the soft earth. Thomas couldn't look at her. His daughter was wearing the same determined expression Catherine had always worn when facing difficulties. Chin up, shoulders back, refusing to let fear show in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Em," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. "I should have been here. The drainage system—" He gestured helplessly at the flooded fields. "A woman was stranded on the back road. I couldn't just—" Emily wrapped her arms around him, not caring that his clothes were still soaked from the night's rain. "You did what Mom would have done," she whispered. The simple truth of her words made his eyes burn. Inside the farmhouse, their answering machine blinked with urgency. 3 messages from William Parker at the bank, each more stern than the last. Thomas played them on speakerphone as he made coffee with shaking hands. "Mr. Reeves, I've just received the weather report. I trust you took proper precautions with your crops. Remember our conversation about collateral? The second message was shorter. Call me first thing in the morning. We need to discuss your situation." The third message, left just minutes ago, made Thomas's coffee cup freeze halfway to his lips. "I'm driving out to assess the damage myself. Expect me by noon." Emily sat at the kitchen table, her college acceptance letter finally open between them. They'd taken it out last night before the storm, allowing themselves a moment to dream. Now the crisp paper seemed to mock them. Thomas watched his daughter carefully fold it and slip it back into its envelope. "I can defer for a year," she said quietly. "Maybe 2. Work at the diner in town, save up some money." "No." Thomas's voice was firm despite his exhaustion. "Your mother and I always said education comes first. We'll figure something out." But even as he said the words, he knew their options were running out. Maria arrived mid-morning with food and her practical brand of comfort. "My Alberto lost 3 farms before he found his feet," she reminded them, setting down a casserole. "Sometimes God closes a door so you'll look for the window." She hugged Emily tight and pressed a small envelope into Thomas's hand. "Her retirement savings," she explained. "Not much, but enough to buy time, perhaps." Thomas tried to refuse, but Maria cut him off. "You've helped me stay in my home these past 5 years," she said firmly. "Let me help you keep yours." Her kindness nearly broke him, but he couldn't accept it. Not when he knew the money wouldn't be enough to save the farm anyway. As promised, William Parker's luxury sedan pulled up at noon, looking out of place among the puddles and mud. The bank manager stepped out in expensive boots that were clearly new, bought just for such occasions. His practiced expression of sympathy didn't quite hide his satisfaction as he surveyed the damage. "Thomas," Parker nodded, pulling out his tablet. "I think we both know where this is going. Even before this storm, you were 3 payments behind. Now," he gestured at the waterlogged fields, "I've got buyers interested in the land. If you agree to a voluntary foreclosure, the bank can be generous with the timeline. Give you maybe 60 days to—" A distant sound interrupted him. At first, Thomas thought it was just the wind, but it grew louder, a rhythmic thumping that made them all look up. Emily rushed out onto the porch, pointing at something above the tree line. "Dad, look!" A sleek, black helicopter appeared over the farm, its downdraft creating ripples in the standing water of the fields. Thomas shielded his eyes, watching in disbelief as it circled once before beginning its descent, in the only dry part of his front pasture. The corporate logo on its side was unclear from this distance, but even Parker had stopped talking, his mouth slightly open as he watched. As the helicopter's blades slowed, its door opened to reveal 3 people in business attire. The first to step out was Dr. Alexandra Patel, looking very different from the rain-soaked woman Thomas had helped the night before. Behind her came a distinguished-looking man who shared her features, her brother, Michael Patel, though Thomas didn't know that yet. The third person carried what looked like legal documents. Thomas felt Emily's hand slip into his as they watched the visitors approach. Dr. Patel's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her walk, a sense of purpose that made Thomas's heart beat faster. Parker stepped forward, introducing himself, but Dr. Patel walked right past him. She stopped in front of Thomas, extended her hand, and spoke the words that would change everything. "Mr. Reeves, I believe I owe you a proper thank you for last night. But first, we need to discuss the future of farming in Millbrook Valley, and your role in it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas's muddy boots left prints on his own porch as he led the unexpected visitors inside. The old wooden boards creaked beneath their feet, a sound that usually embarrassed him when guests came calling. Today, though, his mind was too preoccupied with the surreal sight of a corporate helicopter parked in his front pasture to worry about his home's imperfections. Emily quickly cleared the kitchen table of her school books, while Maria quietly excused herself, squeezing Thomas's arm as she passed. "I'll be right next door if you need me," she whispered, her eyes bright with cautious hope. William Parker lingered uncertainly by the door, his usual confidence wavering in the presence of people whose wealth clearly dwarfed his own. The bank manager's new boots were already caked with mud, and he kept shifting uncomfortably, looking like a man who'd suddenly found himself in the wrong story. "Please sit," Thomas offered, acutely aware of the worn furniture and peeling wallpaper. The morning light filtering through the windows highlighted every crack and imperfection in the old farmhouse. Dr. Patel took a seat at the head of the table, her brother Michael joining her while their associate, a sharp-dressed woman who'd introduced herself as Ms. Harrison, arranged documents with practiced efficiency. The helicopter's blades were still cooling down outside, their gentle ticking punctuating the silence. Through the window, Thomas could see several curious neighbors had gathered at the edge of his property, their trucks parked along the road. News traveled fast in Millbrook Valley. "Mr. Reeves," Dr. Patel began, her voice carrying the same warmth he remembered from the storm, though now it was wrapped in clear authority. "I don't believe I properly introduced myself last night. I'm Dr. Alexandra Patel, Chief Innovation Officer of Agritech Global. This is my brother, Michael Patel, our CEO." She gestured to the man beside her, who nodded warmly. "What you don't know is that I wasn't lost by accident yesterday." Thomas felt Emily shift closer to him, her hand finding his arm. The acceptance letter crinkled in her pocket. She'd grabbed it from the counter, though Thomas couldn't guess why. Maybe, like him, she felt this moment somehow connected to all their hopes and dreams. "For the past year," Dr. Patel continued, pulling up detailed satellite images on a tablet. We've been secretly developing a revolutionary drought-resistant farming system. Not just better seeds or irrigation. A complete redesign of how family farms can operate in changing climate conditions. But we needed to test it in real conditions, on a working family farm. We've been quietly surveying properties across 3 states, looking for the right part. Michael Patel opened a sleek laptop, turning it to show a detailed analysis of Thomas's farm. The screen displayed soil composition charts, water table data, and topographical overlays that made Thomas's hand-drawn farm maps look like child's drawings. Your land has exactly the soil composition and topographical features we need. The gradient of your fields, the mineral content of your soil, even the prevailing wind patterns, it's perfect for what we're developing. He zoomed in on specific areas of the farm. We've been studying your property for months, trying to figure out how to approach you. Then last night, my sister's car actually did break down. Sometimes fate has a sense of humor. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. She called me immediately after you helped her. Not because of the car, but because she'd finally found what we've been looking for. Someone with not just the right land, but the right character. Character? Thomas echoed, his voice rough with emotion. My character got these fields flooded. I left my crops exposed to help a stranger. Exactly, Dr. Patel said softly. You chose to help someone in need, even knowing it might cost you everything. That's exactly the kind of person we want to partner with. William Parker cleared his throat from his position by the door, his face flushed. I should mention that this property is currently under review for foreclosure. The bank has certain procedures that must be followed, regardless of any potential arrangements. We're aware of the situation, Michael interrupted smoothly, sliding a document across the table. The paper was thick, expensive, with his company's logo embossed in gold at the top. In fact, we've already contacted your bank's regional office. We're prepared to clear all outstanding debts on this property immediately. The paperwork is being processed as we speak. Thomas's hands trembled as he looked at the paper. The number at the bottom made his vision blur. It was more money than his family had seen in 3 generations of farming. I don't understand, he managed to say. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Patel leaned forward, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. A partnership, Mr. Reeves. We want to transform your farm into Agrotech's first pilot site for our new farming system. You'll retain full ownership of your land, but we'll provide all the technology, training, and initial capital. Our engineers have already drawn up plans to prevent flooding like what happened last night. In return, we get to test our systems in real conditions and use the data to help other family farms. Ms. Harrison placed more documents on the table, each one outlined with colored tabs. The contract includes several key provisions, she explained professionally. First, a generous monthly stipend during the transition period. Second, a percentage of all future patents developed using data from your farm. Third, and I think this might interest you both, she glanced at Emily with a kind smile, we're establishing a scholarship fund for agricultural studies. Full ride, including room and board. Emily's grip on Thomas's arm tightened so much it almost hurt. He could feel her trembling with suppressed hope, and his heart ached with the possibility of her dreams suddenly being within reach. But years of hardship had taught him to be cautious. And if your system doesn't work? He asked quietly. What happens to my farm then? Michael Patel's response was immediate, as if he'd been waiting for this question. That's exactly why we want you, Mr. Reeves. You asked the right questions. The contract includes a full guarantee. If our systems fail to increase your yield by at least 200% within 2 years, we'll still cover all your debts and provide traditional farming equipment to replace anything we've modified. You can't lose, Mr. Reeves. We're not here to take your farm. We're here to help you save it, and in doing so, help us save others. The next few weeks transformed Millbrook Valley in ways nobody could have imagined. The day after Thomas signed the contract, a convoy of trucks rolled onto his property, carrying equipment that looked more suited to a science fiction movie than a family farm. Teams of engineers in agrotech uniforms swarmed across his fields, installing soil sensors, automated irrigation systems, and weather monitoring stations. Thomas watched in amazement as Dr. Patel's team worked to reshape his failing farm into something extraordinary. The first order of business had been installing a revolutionary drainage system that would have prevented the previous storm's damage. "See these channels?" Dr. Patel explained, showing him a 3D model on her tablet. "They'll direct excess water to underground storage tanks. During dry spells, the system automatically redistributes that stored water to where it's needed most." Emily threw herself into learning everything she could about the new technology. She'd delayed her college start date by 1 semester, her own choice this time, to help with the farm's transformation. "Dad, look at this!" she'd exclaim several times a day, showing him how the soil sensors could predict exactly when each section of the field needed attention. Her eyes sparkled with the same curiosity he remembered seeing in Catherine's whenever she'd tackled a new challenge. The changes weren't limited to just technology. Agrotech's presence brought new life to the entire community. Local businesses flourished as engineers and technicians filled the town's restaurants and hotels. The diner where Emily had once planned to work to save for college now had a waiting list every morning. Maria's guest rooms were booked solid with visiting agricultural scientists who preferred her home-cooked meals to hotel food. William Parker had disappeared after that first day, transferred to another branch according to rumors. His replacement at the bank, a younger woman named Sarah Collins, took a keen interest in helping other struggling farmers connect with Agrotech's programs. "What's happening at the Reeves farm isn't just a one-time thing," she explained during a community meeting. "It's a blueprint for saving family farms everywhere." 1 month into the transformation, Thomas stood in his fields at dawn, just as he always had. But now, instead of worrying about failing crops, he watched in wonder as automated sprinklers adjusted themselves based on real-time soil moisture readings. His phone buzzed with updates from the farm management system, telling him exactly which areas needed attention and which were thriving. "It's something else, isn't it?" came a voice behind him. Thomas turned to find Michael Patel, who had taken to visiting the farm regularly to check on their pilot program's progress. The Agrotech CEO looked oddly at home walking through the fields in his rubber boots, which Emily had insisted he needed after his first visit had ruined an expensive pair of leather shoes. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," Thomas admitted, watching as one of the autonomous monitoring drones made its morning pass over the crops. "A month ago, I was about to lose everything. Now, you're helping us change the future of farming," Michael finished. "But you know what's really remarkable? Look there." He pointed to where a group of local farmers was gathering near the property line. It was time for the weekly tour and training session, Thomas's idea, which both Patel siblings had enthusiastically supported. Twice a week, Thomas opened his farm to other families struggling with the same challenges he'd faced. He showed them the new systems, explained how the technology worked, and shared his experiences. But more importantly, he gave them hope. "If this can work here," he often told them, "it can work anywhere. We just have to be willing to embrace change while holding on to what matters most, our connection to the land and each other." Dr. Patel had made him the official community liaison for Agrotech's pilot program. "You speak their language," she'd said. "You understand their fears and their dreams because they're the same as yours." The position came with a salary that had made Thomas's hands shake when he saw the figure, but it was the respect in the other farmers' eyes that meant the most to him. Emily split her time between learning the new farming systems and taking online courses to prepare for her delayed college start. Agrotech had expanded their original scholarship offer to include an internship program that would let her study agricultural technology while still helping manage the farm. "Best of both worlds," she'd said, hugging Thomas tightly, "just like Mom would have wanted." The transformation wasn't without its challenges. Some of the older equipment didn't integrate well with the new systems at first. A few of the soil sensors needed recalibration after an unexpectedly heavy rain. But each problem was met with determination and innovative solutions, often coming from the collaboration between Agrotech's engineers and the local farmers who knew the land intimately. One evening, as Thomas walked his fields checking the evening readings, he found Dr. Patel standing in the spot where her car had been stuck that fateful night. She smiled as he approached. "I've been thinking about fate," she said, looking out over the thriving crops. "If my GPS hadn't malfunctioned exactly here, if it hadn't started raining, if you'd chosen differently. Or if you hadn't been looking for someone like me in the first place," Thomas added, understanding in his voice. "Sometimes the right thing and the hard thing are the same thing." "That's exactly what I told the board when we started this project," she replied. "We didn't just need the right land or the right conditions, we needed the right heart." She gestured to where another group of farmers was gathering for the evening training session. "Look what your kindness started, Thomas. One choice, one moment of helping a stranger, and now." Her voice trailed off as they watched the sun setting over fields that were no longer just surviving, but thriving in ways Thomas had never imagined possible. In the distance, Emily was explaining the drone monitoring system to a teenager from one of the neighboring farms, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke. The evening light caught the silver charm bracelet on her wrist, Catherine's bracelet, which she now wore every day. Thomas touched the wedding ring he still wore, thinking of how proud his wife would be of the legacy their family was building. 1 month into the transformation, Millbrook Valley buzzed with an energy it hadn't seen in decades. The first phase of Agrotech's pilot program was nearing completion, and the changes to the Reeves farm had become the talk of 3 counties. Local news crews had taken to parking along the road, hoping to catch glimpses of the mysterious technology that seemed to have sprouted overnight in Thomas's fields. Thomas still woke before dawn, a habit of 30 years that even revolutionary farming technology couldn't break. But now, instead of facing his morning inspections with dread, he found himself eager to check the array of monitors that lined his renovated barn office. Dr. Patel's team had converted the old storage space into what they called the command center, though Thomas still felt strange calling it that. "Look at the soil moisture readings," Emily exclaimed, joining him with 2 cups of coffee. She'd taken to the new systems like she'd been born to them, mastering in weeks what many of the agrotech engineers had studied for years. "The smart irrigation system predicted last night's temperature drop perfectly. It adjusted the water flow to protect the new seedlings before the frost could damage them." Thomas nodded, studying the complex graphs on the main screen. A month ago, these displays would have seemed like science fiction to him. Now he understood not just what they meant, but why they mattered. The system hadn't just saved his crops from frost damage. It had done it using less water than his old methods would have wasted in a single morning. "Dad, come look at this," Emily called from the doorway. Thomas followed her out into the crisp morning air. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. But it wasn't the sunrise that had caught Emily's attention. All across his fields, tiny green shoots were pushing through the soil, the first crops planted using Agrotech's new methods. The rows were perfectly straight, each plant positioned with precision by automated seeders. Subtle differences in the soil composition had been analyzed and accounted for, ensuring each seed was planted in its optimal location. "Those weren't there yesterday," Emily whispered, kneeling to examine the delicate sprouts, the growth acceleration formula Dr. Patel's team developed. "It actually works." Thomas touched one of the tiny plants gently, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. When Dr. Patel had first explained their growth acceleration technology, it had seemed too good to be true. "By optimizing soil conditions and nutrient delivery," she'd said, "we can reduce germination time by 60% while increasing yield potential." Now the proof was quite literally sprouting before his eyes. A familiar rumble of tires on gravel announced the arrival of Maria's old pickup truck. The elderly neighbor had appointed herself unofficial photographer of the farm's transformation, documenting every change with her late husband's camera. She'd already filled 3 albums with photos, insisting that someday these pictures would be historically important. "Thomas, Emily," she called out, hurrying across the field with surprising agility for her age. "The morning news crew is setting up by the main road. They're saying something about a big announcement." Before Thomas could respond, The distinctive sound of helicopter blades cut through the morning calm. He looked up to see the now familiar agrotech aircraft approaching. But today it was accompanied by two others. As they descended toward the landing pad, Thomas spotted Dr. Patel in the lead helicopter, along with several people he didn't recognize. "Right on time," Emily grinned, checking her watch. "Don't worry, Dad. Dr. Patel told me about this yesterday. You're going to want to change into that new shirt she sent over." Thomas raised an eyebrow at his daughter. "You knew about this?" "Only since yesterday afternoon. They wanted to wait until the first accelerated crops sprouted before making the announcement." Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "This is big, Dad. Really big." Within an hour, the quiet morning had transformed into organized chaos. News vans lined the road, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. A podium had been set up at the edge of the field, positioned so the cameras could capture both the speakers and the rows of emerging crops behind them. Dr. Patel approached Thomas as her team made final preparations. She looked different today, more formal in a business suit, but her eyes still held the same warmth he remembered from that rainy night. "Ready to help us change the world, Thomas?" He looked at her questioningly. "I thought we were already doing that." She smiled, handing him a folder. "This was just the beginning. What we've achieved here, what you helped us prove was possible." She gestured to the sprouting fields. "Today, we announce the global expansion of the program, and we want you to lead it." Thomas opened the folder with trembling hands, his eyes widening as he read the proposal inside. Behind him, Emily squeezed his arm in excitement, while Maria wiped tears from her eyes. In the distance, more vehicles were arriving. Buses carrying farmers from neighboring countries came to witness whatever announcement had brought 3 agrotech helicopters to Millbrook Valley. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating fields that now held more than just crops. They held the future of farming itself, and it had all started with one simple act of kindness on a stormy night. The morning sun climbed higher as more people gathered at the Reeves farm. News crews jostled for position near the podium while farmers from across the state filled the newly constructed viewing area. Thomas stood off to the side, still processing the contents of the folder Dr. Patel had handed him. Emily read over his shoulder, her hand gripping his arm tightly. "Global Agricultural Innovation Director," she whispered, tracing the words on the contract with her finger. "Dad, do you realize what this means?" Before Thomas could respond, Michael Patel approached them, accompanied by a group of distinguished-looking individuals. "Thomas, I'd like you to meet some people," he said, his usual warm smile carrying an extra measure of pride today. "These are representatives from the United Nations World Food Program, the European Union Agricultural Commission, and several major agricultural nations." Thomas shook hands with each visitor, trying to keep his composure as they introduced themselves. A tall woman with silver hair spoke with a slight Norwegian accent. "Mr. Reeves, what your farm has accomplished in just 1 month is remarkable. The growth acceleration results alone could revolutionize food security in developing nations." "I just did what needed doing," Thomas replied modestly. "Dr. Patel and her team are the ones who made all this possible." "That's not entirely true," Alexandra Patel cut in, joining the group. She'd changed into her presentation attire but had sensibly worn practical boots, a lesson learned from her first visit. Technology was only part of the equation. What made this pilot program succeed was the perfect balance of innovation and traditional farming wisdom. That's why we want you to lead the global initiative, Thomas. She turned to address the gathered officials. "Mr. Reeves isn't just a farmer who adopted our technology. He helped us refine it, improve it, and make it practical for real-world conditions. His insights led to 17 modifications in our original designs, each one making the system more efficient and user-friendly." The Norwegian representative nodded approvingly. "We've reviewed the data. The integration of traditional farming knowledge with advanced technology is precisely what our previous attempts at agricultural modernization were missing." Thomas felt Emily squeeze his arm again as Maria hurried over, camera in hand. "They're ready to begin," she announced, her voice trembling with excitement. The gathered crowd had grown larger than anything Millbrook Valley had seen in decades. Local farmers stood shoulder to shoulder with international dignitaries, all eyes focused on the podium where Michael Patel was preparing to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael's voice carried across the hushed crowd. "1 month ago, we launched a pilot program here at the Reeves farm. Today, you can see the results for yourselves." He gestured to the fields behind him, where the accelerated crops stretched in perfect rows, their growth visible even from a distance. "But what you're seeing is more than just advanced agricultural technology. You're seeing the future of farming itself." Screens positioned around the viewing area lit up with detailed statistics and comparisons. "In just 30 days, we've achieved what traditional methods would take months to accomplish. Water usage has been reduced by 70%, while crop yield projections have increased threefold. Soil health has improved dramatically, and our growth acceleration formula has proven safe and effective across multiple crop varieties." Dr. Patel took the podium next, her presence commanding immediate attention. "But numbers tell only part of the story. What we've created here is a template for saving family farms around the world. Today, I'm proud to announce that Agrotech Global, in partnership with the United Nations and the EU Agricultural Commission, will be expanding this program to 20 countries by the end of the year." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Camera flashes intensified as photographers captured what they knew was a historic moment. "To lead this global initiative," Dr. Patel continued, "we've chosen someone who embodies the perfect combination of traditional farming values and openness to innovation. Someone who showed us that the future of farming isn't about replacing human wisdom with technology, but about enhancing it." Thomas felt Emily and Maria each take one of his hands as Dr. Patel turned toward him. "Thomas Reeves, would you join me at the podium?" His boots felt heavy as he walked forward, acutely aware of all the eyes upon him. The folder in his hands contained more than just a job offer. It represented hope for struggling farmers around the world. As he reached the podium, memories flooded his mind. The storm that had nearly destroyed everything, the choice to help a stranger, the helicopter's arrival that had changed everything. Dr. Patel smiled warmly. "Mr. Reeves will serve as our Global Agricultural Innovation Director, working directly with farming communities worldwide to implement and adapt our systems to local conditions. His experience and insight will be invaluable as we work to revolutionize agriculture on a global scale." Thomas stepped up to the microphone, his heart pounding. He hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't known he'd need one. But as he looked out at the crowd, he saw faces he recognized. Farmers who had worked this land for generations just as his family had. People who understood that farming was more than just a job. It was a way of life. "A month ago," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I thought I was about to lose everything, my farm, my family's legacy, my daughter's future." He glanced at Emily, who beamed at him through tears. "But then something happened that reminded me of what my late wife Catherine always used to say, that kindness has a way of growing, just like the crops we tend." A gentle breeze rustled through the accelerated crops behind him, carrying the sweet smell of healthy soil and new growth. "What we've built here isn't just about advanced technology or better farming methods. It's about preserving a way of life while embracing the future. It's about making sure that family farms don't just survive, but thrive for generations to come." As Thomas continued speaking, sharing his vision for combining traditional farming wisdom with revolutionary technology, he noticed William Parker, his former bank manager, standing at the back of the crowd. The man who had once threatened foreclosure now watched with undisguised amazement as his former client stood poised to change the face of global agriculture. The days following the announcement transformed the Reeves farm into a hive of activity, unlike anything Millbrook Valley had ever seen. The steady stream of visitors had grown into a flood, with agricultural delegations from around the world arriving daily to witness the miracle crops that had sprouted in just 1 month. Thomas found himself at the center of a whirlwind, his quiet farming life rapidly evolving into something he could never have imagined. "Mr. Reeves, could you explain the integration process to our Brazilian delegation?" Dr. Patel asked. gesturing to a group of earnest-looking officials. "They're particularly interested in how you adapted our irrigation systems to work with traditional farming methods." Thomas led the group through his fields, his work-worn hands gesturing to the various innovations that now dotted his land. He'd surprised himself with how quickly he'd mastered the technical aspects of the new systems. But what really caught the visitors' attention was his ability to explain complex technology in simple, practical terms that any farmer could understand. "See, the key isn't replacing what we know works," he explained, kneeling to scoop up a handful of rich soil. "It's about enhancing it. These sensors don't tell us anything experienced farmers don't already know about their land. They just help us be more precise about when and how we respond." Emily had taken charge of the youth education programs, working with Agrotech's engineers to develop training modules for the next generation of farmers. Her college plans had evolved. She would still attend in the fall, but now with a full scholarship and a paid position developing educational content for Agrotech's global initiative. "Dad, look at this," she called out, rushing across the field with her tablet. "The university wants to set up a satellite campus here at the farm. Agricultural technology and traditional farming methods side by side." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Students could learn both the old ways and the new, right where they meet. Maria had transformed her guest rooms into a proper conference center, hosting agricultural scientists and farming experts from around the world. Her home-cooked meals had become legendary among the visitors, with several international delegates extending their stays just to sample more of her cooking. "Thomas," she called from her porch one evening, just as he was finishing up with a group from India. "Alexandra left these for you to review before tomorrow's video conference." She handed him a stack of documents, then added with a knowing smile, "And there's a fresh apple pie cooling in the kitchen if you need something to help you through all that paperwork." The paperwork had been the biggest adjustment. Thomas now spent his evenings reviewing implementation plans for farms across the globe, each one requiring careful consideration of local conditions and traditions. But he'd discovered a talent for spotting potential problems and suggesting practical solutions that balanced innovation with proven farming wisdom. "Your insights are invaluable," Michael Patel told him during one late-night strategy session. "You see things our engineers miss, the human element that makes or breaks these kinds of transitions." He paused, studying a map showing their planned expansion sites. "That's why we need you to go to India next week. Their agricultural minister specifically requested your presence for the launch of their pilot program." Thomas looked up sharply. "India, but the farm." "Will be in excellent hands, Doctor," Patel assured him, entering the office with a fresh set of soil analysis reports. "Emily has mastered the systems, and our team will maintain everything while you're gone. Besides," she added with a smile, "this is part of your new role. Your experience here needs to be shared." Later that night, Thomas stood in his fields under a star-filled sky, trying to process how much his life had changed. The gentle hum of automated systems mixed with the familiar chorus of cricket songs, old and new in perfect harmony. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from farmers around the world, each one eager to learn how they too could save their family farms. Emily found him there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Can't sleep?" she asked, passing him one of the mugs. "Thinking about India?" Thomas nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. "Your mother would never believe all this," he said softly. "Remember how she used to say every kindness plants a seed? I don't think even she could have imagined what would grow from helping a stranded traveler that night." "She'd be proud, Dad," Emily replied, linking her arm through his. "Not just of the farm's success or your new role, but because you stayed true to who you are. That's what all these visitors see, you know. Not just the technology or the impressive yields. They see hope. Hope that they can save their own farms without losing their identity as farmers." The next morning brought more visitors. A film crew making a documentary about the transformation of American farming, agricultural students eager to learn about the new systems, and farmers from neighboring states hoping to join the program. Thomas moved among them with quiet confidence, answering questions, solving problems, and sharing the vision of a future where family farms didn't just survive, but thrive. Dr. Patel watched from the edge of the field as Thomas demonstrated the soil monitoring system to a group of skeptical older farmers. Within minutes, their doubt had transformed into keen interest as he showed them how the technology could enhance rather than replace their generations of farming knowledge. "That's why we chose him," she said to her brother, who had joined her. "He bridges worlds, the traditional and the modern, the practical and the innovative. Every farmer who visits here leaves with more than just knowledge of our systems. They leave with hope." Michael nodded, watching as Thomas used his smartphone to show real-time crop data to the amazed farmers. Who would have thought, he mused, that helping a stranded traveler would lead to all this? "I would," Dr. Patel smiled. "The best innovations always start with simple human kindness. Everything else grows from there." Thomas stared out the window of Agrotech's private jet as it descended toward Mumbai, the sprawling Indian city sparkling beneath the early morning sun. Just 3 months ago, he'd never left Millbrook Valley. Now here he was, halfway around the world about to help implement the farming program that had saved his own land. "Nervous?" Dr. Patel asked, looking up from her laptop. She'd insisted on accompanying him on this first international mission, knowing that her family's Indian heritage and connections would help smooth the transition. "The agricultural minister is eager to meet you. Your success story has made quite an impression." Thomas adjusted his new suit, still strange compared to his usual work clothes. "I just hope I can help them the way you helped me," he replied, thinking of the satellite images he'd studied. The drought-stricken regions of Maharashtra state looked painfully familiar, reminding him of his own struggling fields just months ago. Emily had insisted on managing the farm in his absence, with support from the Agrotech team. "Go change the world, Dad," she'd said at the airport, pressing a small package into his hands. Inside, he'd found Catherine's old compass with a note. "Mom always said you had a true north, helping others. Now the whole world gets to see it." The delegation waiting at Mumbai International Airport included government officials, local agricultural experts, and several farmers who had been chosen for the initial pilot program. Among them stood Rajesh Patel, no relation to Alexandra and Michael, a third-generation farmer whose situation eerily mirrored Thomas's own story. "Mr. Reeves," Rajesh greeted him with folded hands. "Your story has given hope to many of us. My daughter, like yours, dreams of education, but our farm." He gestured helplessly, and Thomas saw the same worry in his eyes that he'd carried for so long. The drive to Maharashtra's agricultural region revealed the scope of their challenge. Miles of parched earth stretched toward the horizon, broken only by scattered patches of struggling crops. But Thomas noticed something else too: the determination in the faces of farmers working their fields despite the odds. "They're resilient," Dr. Patel commented, following his gaze. "Like you were. They just need the right tools and support." At the first demonstration site, Thomas found himself surrounded by curious farmers, their questions coming rapid-fire through interpreters. But he noticed their skepticism too, the same look he'd seen in his own mirror months ago when faced with radical change. "Before we talk about technology," Thomas said, kneeling to scoop up a handful of soil, "tell me about your land. How long have your families farmed here? What worked in the past doesn't work now." The simple gesture broke the ice. Soon, older farmers were sharing traditional wisdom passed down through generations, while younger ones asked eager questions about the new systems. Thomas listened carefully, already seeing ways to adapt Agrotech's technology to complement their traditional methods. "See here," he demonstrated, using a tablet to show real-time soil analysis. "Your ancestors knew this soil like they knew their own heartbeats. These sensors don't replace that knowledge. They help you apply it with precision you never had before." Rajesh's farm had been chosen as the first implementation site. As Thomas helped install the soil sensors, he shared stories about his own journey. 3 months ago, I was about to lose everything," he told the gathered farmers. Now my daughter's heading to college, and I'm here helping other farmers create their own success stories. The breakthrough came during lunch, shared under a massive banyan tree. Thomas noticed the farmers discussing something in hushed tones. Then Rajesh stood up. "Mr. Reeves, we have been talking. You are not like other experts who visit us. You have dirt under your fingernails. You understand that farming is not just business. It is heritage, family, life itself." Dr. Patel translated as more farmers spoke up, sharing their fears about changing traditional methods but also their desperate need for solutions. Thomas listened, then pulled out his phone. "Emily, can you show our friends here what the North Field looks like now?" His daughter's face appeared on the screen, and she turned the camera to show the thriving crops back home. The Indian farmers crowded around, murmuring in appreciation at the perfectly straight rows and healthy plants. "That's 3 months of progress," Thomas explained. "But more importantly, we still maintain our traditional farming calendar, our community harvest celebrations, everything that makes farming more than just agriculture." As the sun set over Maharashtra, Thomas stood with Rajesh at the edge of his farm, where the first soil sensors were already beginning to gather data. "Tomorrow," Thomas said, "we'll install the irrigation systems. Within a week, you'll see the first signs of change. But the most important change has already happened." "What is that?" Rajesh asked. "Hope," Thomas replied simply. "The same hope I felt when I realized I wouldn't lose my farm after all." Later that night, in his hotel room, Thomas video called Emily for their daily update. "The crops look amazing, Dad," she reported excitedly. "Maria's keeping everyone fed, and guess what? 3 more countries called today asking about implementation programs." Thomas smiled, thinking of the farmers he'd met today. "Send me the details. I think we're going to be busy for a while." He took out Catherine's compass, watching the needle swing steadily north. Somewhere out there, other farmers were facing the same desperate choice he'd faced that rainy night. But now, because he'd chosen kindness over self-preservation, they would have options he never had. "You were right, Catherine," he whispered to the quiet room. "Kindness does plant seeds, and sometimes they grow into forests." 2 months after the India trip, Thomas found himself standing in a state-of-the-art control room that had been built onto his old barn. Wall-mounted screens displayed real-time data from farms across 12 countries, each point of light representing a family whose life had been changed by the program. The old wooden beams still overhead served as a reminder of where it all began. "Brazil's numbers just came in," Emily announced, entering with her tablet. She delayed her college start by 1 more semester, but now with a purpose, Agrotech had appointed her youth education coordinator for their global initiative. "Their crop yield is already up 180% from last season. They're calling it the agricultural revolution." Thomas nodded, his eyes fixed on a particular screen showing Rajesh's farm in India. The transformation there had exceeded even their optimistic projections. What had been parched earth 2 months ago now bloomed with healthy crops, the automated systems working in perfect harmony with traditional farming methods. "Mr. Reeves," a young technician called from his station. "We have a situation in Kenya. Their local farmers are worried about integrating the automated irrigation with their traditional rain forecasting methods." "Put them through to the main screen," Thomas replied, straightening his collar. These video conferences had become routine, but he still felt strange seeing himself broadcast across the world. The massive display lit up with faces of Kenyan farmers, their concern evident even through the digital connection. "My friends," Thomas began, his voice carrying the same warmth he'd used talking to a neighbor over a fence. "Let me tell you about something my wife Catherine used to say about farming traditions." As he spoke, he could see their expressions shifting from worry to interest. By the end of the call, they were sharing stories and laughing together, the technical concerns forgotten in the face of human connection. Dr. Patel watched from the doorway, smiling. "You know," she said after the call ended, "when we first designed this program, we thought the technology would be the hard part. But you showed us something more valuable: how to help farmers embrace the future without losing their past. The control room door opened again as Maria bustled in with her famous apple pies. She'd taken to feeding the entire technical team, claiming that even agricultural revolutionaries needed home cooking. Behind her came Michael Patel, looking unusually excited. She starts engineering school next semester. Emily grabbed her father's hand, both of them thinking of her own journey. Across the world, the program wasn't just saving farms, it was opening doors for the next generation. The scholarship fund had grown beyond anyone's expectations, now supporting hundreds of farmers' children in pursuing agricultural technology degrees. "Dad, look at this," Emily said softly, pulling up another screen. It showed a global map dotted with points of light, each representing a farm in the program. The lights were spreading like stars appearing at dusk, creating constellations of hope across continents. A message flashed on one of the smaller screens. William Parker's replacement at the bank wanted to schedule a meeting. The same bank that had once threatened foreclosure was now offering special financing to help other farmers join the program. Thomas allowed himself a small smile at the irony. "Mr. Reeves?" "Jag retiter med den bar, dan session mir." Connection called. "The Australian delegation is ready for their orientation call. They're implementing the program across the Outback region." As Thomas prepared for the call, he glanced at the old farm photo still hanging on the barn wall. 3 generations of Reeves farmers smiled back at him, their dreams of sustaining the family farm now transformed into something far greater. Below it hung a newer edition, a frame containing the muddy boots he'd worn the night he helped Dr. Patel, preserved as a reminder of how everything had changed. "You know what today is?" Emily asked, joining him at the photo wall. "Exactly 3 months since that rainy night. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed." Before Thomas could respond, alerts began chiming across multiple screens. The system was detecting unprecedented growth rates in the Southeast Asian pilot sites. As technicians scrambled to analyze the data, Thomas felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he used to get watching his own crops thrive. "Mr. Reeves," called a voice from another screen. "Chile is reporting successful implementation in their drought-affected regions. They're requesting you for their National Agricultural Conference next month." Maria appeared at his elbow with fresh coffee. "Your father," she said, nodding at the old photo. "He always said the Reeves family was meant to feed people. I don't even think he imagined feeding the world." Thomas touched Catherine's compass in his pocket, his constant companion now on his global travels. The needle always pointed to the true north, just as his wife had always pointed him toward helping others. Now, because of one choice on a rainy night, farmers around the world were finding their own true north. "Emily," he said, turning to his daughter, "pull up the new application list. Let's see who we can help next." The screens around them continued to flicker with data streams and updates, each number representing another family farm saved, another heritage preserved, another future secured. Outside, the sun set over Thomas's own thriving fields, where it had all begun with a simple act of kindness that had grown into a global harvest of hope. The morning of the 1-year anniversary dawned clear and bright over Millbrook Valley. Thomas stood in his fields, just as he had done countless mornings before. But today was different. The endless rows of thriving crops before him were just a small part of something that had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined that rainy night 12 months ago. "Dad!" Emily's voice carried across the field. "The first buses are arriving." She jogged toward him, tablet in hand, looking professional in her agrotech uniform, yet still every bit the farmer's daughter. Her first semester of college had just ended, where she'd earned top marks while simultaneously managing youth outreach for the global program. Today, the Reeves farm would host representatives from every country participating in what the media had dubbed the agricultural renaissance. The small airfield outside town had been busy since dawn, receiving private jets and chartered flights bringing farmers, officials, and media from around the world. "Rajesh's plane just landed," Emily reported, checking her tablet. and Maria's already got the welcome breakfast set up in the conference center. The conference center was what they now called Maria's expanded property, which had grown into a proper agricultural education facility while still somehow maintaining its homey charm. Thomas watched as a fleet of vehicles approached along the newly paved road leading to his farm. A year ago, that same road had been the muddy track where he'd found Dr. Patel's car stuck in the rain. Now it served as the main artery for what had become the global headquarters of Agrotech's revolutionary farming program. "Thomas," Dr. Patel called out, approaching with a group of dignitaries. "The UN Secretary-General would like to see the original implementation site before the ceremony." She'd barely finished speaking when another voice called from behind them. "Mr. Reeves." Rajesh hurried over, his face beaming. Like Thomas, he'd trade his worn work clothes for a suit, though his weathered hands still spoke of a lifetime in the fields. "My daughter Priya sends her regards from engineering school. The scholarship program. It has changed everything for us." The morning unfolded in a whirlwind of tours and presentations. Thomas led groups through the advanced monitoring facilities that had been built onto his old barn, showing how traditional farming wisdom had been integrated with cutting-edge technology. Every visitor had a story to share, of farms saved, communities revitalized, and hope restored. "Look at these numbers," Michael Patel announced during the mid-morning briefing, displaying global statistics on the massive screens. Over 10,000 family farms were brought into the program. Average yield increases of 240%. Water usage was reduced by 65%. But most importantly, he smiled at Thomas, not a single participating farm has been lost to foreclosure. William Parker's replacement at the bank, Sarah Collins, stood up to share her own report. The financial institution had created a special division dedicated to helping struggling farmers transition into the program. What started as a potential foreclosure has become the model for agricultural financing worldwide, she announced proudly. In the demonstration fields, Emily led groups of young farmers through hands-on training with the latest innovations. Many were children of program participants, eager to carry their family legacies forward while embracing new technologies. Thomas watched his daughter with pride, seeing how she effortlessly bridged the gap between old and new, just as he had learned to do. "She's a natural teacher," Maria commented, appearing at his side with coffee. "Just like Catherine was." She nodded toward the wall of photos in the conference center, where Catherine's picture held a place of honor among images documenting the program's global impact. The afternoon ceremony brought everyone together under a massive tent set up in the main field. Massive screens showed live feeds from participating farms around the world, their success stories playing out in dozens of languages. Thomas sat between Emily and Dr. Patel, still somewhat amazed to see his own face among the speakers scheduled to address the global audience. "Thomas, you need to see this," he said, pulling up a new display. "The United Nations just released their food security projections. The areas where we've implemented the program are showing unprecedented improvements. They're calling it the most significant advancement in agriculture since the Green Revolution." But Thomas was already focused on another screen, where a familiar face had appeared. "Mr. Reeves," Rajesh called from India, his excitement barely contained. "My daughter received the Agrotech scholarship." When it was his turn to speak, Thomas walked to the podium carrying Catherine's compass. The small device had traveled hundreds of thousands of miles with him over the past year, as he helped implement the program worldwide. Its needle had never failed to point him toward helping others, just as Catherine had always guided him toward doing what was right. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying to crowds gathered both present and virtual, "I stood in these fields watching my crops die, thinking I was about to lose everything." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "But then a stranger's car got stuck on a rainy night, and I had to make a choice between protecting my own interests and helping someone in need." The screens behind him showed clips from that transformative year. The first helicopter landing, the initial crop success, the expansion to India, the growing network of farms spanning continents. "What we've built here isn't just about advanced technology or better farming methods. It's about preserving our heritage while embracing the future. It's about making sure that family farms don't just survive but thrive for generations to come. He held up the compass, its brass surface catching the afternoon sun. My wife, Catherine, used to say that kindness was like planting seeds. You never know exactly what will grow, but something always does. Looking out at all of you today, at the thousands of farms and families whose lives have changed because of this program, I'm reminded that the greatest harvests often start with the smallest acts of compassion. As Thomas concluded his speech, the screens filled with live images from farms around the world: sunrise over restored fields in India, sunset on thriving crops in Brazil, morning mist rising from automated irrigation systems in Kenya. Each image represented a family farm saved, a heritage preserved, a future secured. As the anniversary celebration continued into evening, Thomas found himself drawn to a quieter corner of the conference center. A group of young people had gathered there, children of farmers from a dozen different countries, all participants in what had become known as the Next Generation Initiative. Emily stood among them, no longer just his daughter, but a leader in her own right. The key is balance, she would this. Showing them holographic projections of crop data. We're not replacing traditional farming wisdom, we're enhancing it with technology that helps us apply that wisdom more effectively. Her words echoed Thomas's own teachings, but she'd added her own perspective, speaking the language of a generation born into a digital world, yet deeply rooted in farming traditions. Dr. Patel joined Thomas as he watched the scene. "We're announcing the expansion of the education program tomorrow," she said quietly. "Full scholarships for 1,000 more students next year, with guaranteed positions in the program after graduation." Emily's model of combining traditional agricultural studies with advanced technology has proven incredibly successful. The sound of helicopter blades drew their attention outside, where more guests were arriving for tomorrow's announcements. Michael Patel emerged from one aircraft, accompanied by representatives from major agricultural nations. The expansion plans sitting in Thomas's office would dwarf everything they'd accomplished so far. "Thomas," Michael called out, hurrying over with an excited gleam in his eyes. "The Chinese delegation just confirmed. They want to implement the program across their entire agricultural sector. We're talking about millions of farms." He paused, watching the young people gathered around Emily. "But first, they want to send their next generation here to learn." Inside the conference center's main hall, Maria had outdone herself. Tables groaned under a feast that represented every participating nation's cuisine, while screens showed live feeds from farms across the world. Rajesh's daughter Priya appeared on one display, broadcasting from her engineering lab where she was developing new improvements to the soil monitoring systems. Mr. Reeves, a young farmer from Kenya, approached, his eyes bright with purpose. "My village has gone from near famine to producing surplus crops in just 8 months. Now we're teaching other communities." He gestured to where his younger sister sat with Emily's group. "And my sister starts her agricultural technology degree next semester." Thomas nodded, remembering his own journey from desperation to hope. The program had evolved far beyond saving individual farms. It was creating a sustainable future for agricultural communities worldwide. Every farm brought into the program became a teaching center for its region, creating a network of knowledge and support that grew exponentially. Sarah Collins, the bank manager, approached with a tablet displaying new financial projections. "The model has completely transformed agricultural lending," she explained. "Banks across the world are adopting our framework. When farmers succeed, everyone succeeds." Her words carried extra weight, coming from the institution that had once threatened to foreclose on Thomas's farm. As evening fell, the crowds moved outside for a special demonstration. Emily led the way to a field where the latest innovation was being unveiled, a collection of small, autonomous drones that could plant, monitor, and tend crops with unprecedented precision. But what caught Thomas's attention wasn't the technology itself, but the way it was being controlled. "We based the interface on traditional farming gestures," Emily explained to the gathered crowd. She demonstrated how the system responded to movements that any farmer would recognize, the way they checked soil depth, tested plant health, or gauged weather conditions. Technology adapting to farmers, not the other way around. Dr. Patel stepped forward to elaborate on the next phase of development. Thanks to insights from farmers like Thomas and input from students like Emily, we're creating solutions that honor agricultural heritage while embracing innovation. The Next Generation Initiative isn't just about teaching new technology. It's about preserving the soul of farming itself. Later that night, Thomas walked his fields alone, remembering all the mornings he'd done the same with worry heavy on his shoulders. Now these same fields have become a beacon of hope for farmers worldwide. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from around the globe, questions about implementation, thanks for support, and reports of successful harvests. Emily found him there just as she had so many times before. "The students want to know if you'll share the story again, Dad," she said softly, "about the rainy night and the stranded traveler." She paused, looking out over the gently humming automated systems that monitored their crops. They say it helps them understand that the biggest changes often start with the smallest choices. Thomas pulled out Catherine's compass, its brass surface reflecting the moonlight. "Your mother always said that kindness was like planting seeds," he mused. "But I don't think even she could have imagined what would grow from helping someone that night." The next morning would bring more announcements, more expansions, more lives changed. The program that had saved his farm was now reshaping global agriculture, not by replacing traditional farming, but by helping it evolve. And at its heart was a simple truth that Thomas shared with every new participant. The most advanced technology was worthless without the wisdom of generations who had worked the land. As father and daughter walked back toward the celebration, a new group of helicopters appeared on the horizon. Tomorrow would bring agricultural ministers from 20 more nations, all eager to join what had become a worldwide movement. But tonight, Thomas was content knowing that somewhere, on farms across the globe, other families were finding the same hope that had changed his life one rainy night a year ago. 18 months after that fateful rainy night, Thomas stood in the newly constructed Agricultural Innovation Center that now occupied what had once been his struggling north field. The morning sun streamed through massive windows, illuminating a space where the past and future of farming merged seamlessly. Photos of 3 generations of Reeves farmers shared wall space with holographic displays showing real-time data from farms across the globe. "Dad!" Emily's voice echoed through the atrium. She hurried toward him, her graduating class honor cord still draped around her neck. They just returned from her college ceremony, where she'd given the commencement speech to the first class of the Global Agricultural Innovation Program. "The satellite feed is ready. Farmers from every continent are waiting to join the announcement." Thomas straightened his tie, still an unfamiliar sensation compared to his old work clothes, and followed his daughter to the main presentation hall. Dr. Patel and her brother Michael were already there, along with Maria, who had somehow managed to provide refreshments for viewing parties at every connected farming community worldwide. "Ready to change the world again?" Dr. Patel asked with a warm smile. The screens around them flickered to life, showing faces from every corner of the globe. Rajesh waved from India, where his once parched fields now served as a training center for South Asian farmers. His daughter Priya, now heading their technical division, stood proudly beside him. Thomas took his place at the podium, Catherine's compass in his pocket just as always. The small device had traveled over 1,000,000 miles with him now, accompanying him to farms across 6 continents. But its needle still pointed true north, just as his wife had always pointed him toward helping others. 18 months ago, he began, his voice carrying to hundreds of thousands of farmers worldwide. "I stood in these fields believing I was about to lose everything. My farm, my family's heritage, my daughter's future. It was all slipping away." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, both present and virtual. "Then a stranger's car got stuck on a rainy night, and I had to make a choice between protecting my own interests and helping someone in need." The main screen behind him showed clips from their journey, The first helicopter's arrival, the initial harvest, Emily's first training session, Rajesh's farm transformation, and countless other moments that had built their global movement. What grew from that simple choice wasn't just about saving one farm. It was about proving that when we combine the wisdom of generations with the power of innovation, anything is possible. Michael Patel stepped forward to share the latest statistics. Over 50,000 family farms were brought into the program. Crop yields increased by an average of 280%. Water usage was reduced by 70%. But more importantly, a new generation of farmers emerged who saw their heritage not as a burden, but as a foundation for innovation. Emily took the podium next, her graduation honors glinting in the morning light. "Today, we're announcing the next phase of our journey," she declared confidently. "The Global Agricultural Education Initiative will open 50 new training centers worldwide. Every farming family that joins our program can now send their children to university, combining traditional agricultural wisdom with cutting-edge technology education." The screens filled with images of young people from farming communities around the world, all future participants in the expanded education program. Thomas watched with pride as his daughter detailed the initiative she had helped design, one that would ensure family farms thrived for generations to come. Dr. Patel joined them to announce another breakthrough. Their soil regeneration technology had exceeded all expectations, beginning to reverse decades of environmental damage. But none of this would have been possible, she reminded everyone, without farmers like Thomas showing us that the heart of innovation isn't in laboratories or computers. It's in people who choose to help others even when it costs them something. As the announcements continued, Thomas slipped away quietly to walk his fields one last time as owner. Tomorrow, the Reeves farm would be transferred to the Global Agricultural Trust, becoming permanent headquarters for their worldwide operations. He would remain as director, but the land that had sustained his family for generations would now help sustain farmers around the world. Emily found him there, just as she had so many times before. "Having second thoughts?" she asked softly, linking her arm through his. Thomas shook his head, smiling. "Your mother always said our purpose was bigger than just working the land. She said we were meant to feed people." He looked out over fields that now served as both working farms and living laboratories. I don't even think she imagined feeding the world. "Mr. Reeves," called a familiar voice. They turned to see Rajesh hurrying across the field, having just arrived from India. Behind him came a steady stream of farmers from around the world, people whose lives had been transformed by the program. Many carried small gifts, tokens of gratitude from their cultures and communities. A young farmer from Kenya stepped forward first. "We wanted to show you something," he said, gesturing to one of the large screens. It displayed a map of the world, but instead of political boundaries, it showed points of light representing every farm in their program. The light spread across continents like constellations, each one representing a family whose heritage had been preserved, whose future had been secured. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, squeezing her father's arm. "Those lights," Rajesh added, "they all started here, with one choice on a rainy night." As the sun set over the Innovation Center, Thomas stood surrounded by his expanded family, farmers and innovators, traditionalists and technologists, all united by a shared vision of agriculture's future. Emily was already deep in discussion with the next group of scholarship recipients, while Maria somehow produced enough food to feed the impromptu gathering. Thomas touched the compass in his pocket one last time, feeling Catherine's presence in the cooling evening air. The needle pointed north just as it always had, just as kindness had always pointed the way forward. Out across the fields, the automated systems hummed quietly, monitoring crops that would help feed communities around the world. "You were right, Catherine," he whispered to the evening breeze. "Kindness does plant seeds, and sometimes they grow into forests that cover the whole world." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.